Okay, so we're going to start. We're on page 170, so the beginning of this new packet. Find 170, and it's 105A in the official Babylonian pagination. But we're on page 170, number 4, starting something new here. And we went through it briefly last time, so I'll just go through that quickly, and then we'll move on. So, number 4, Tanan Hatam, Pritzei Zeitim Va'anavim. Okay, so the discussion comes to, you'll see why, you'll see how it connects up. They talk about Pritzei Zeitim Va'anavim, bad olives or bad grapes. The word Pritzei will be analyzed, but that's what it means. Beit Shammai Mitamim. So Shammai says that they can become impure, meaning that they are food. We classify them as food, even though they're bad. Whatever that means, we'll find out what it means. Uveit Hillel Mitarim. And Hillel says they never become a source of impurity because they're not actually food. So they're just like a rock or any kind of inanimate, like this table, any inanimate object. They're not kosher, not kosher. Those categories don't apply to them because they're not food. That's what Beit Shammai says. I'm sorry, that's what Beit Hillel says. Okay. So and the in general, Shammai is going to be stricter about Jewish law than Hillel. So that's being strict. Hillel's saying, don't worry about it. It's not kosher, not kosher. And Shammai says, worry about it. That's it. In a nutshell, that's the difference between the two of them. All right. Amar Rav Huna. So Rav Huna says, number 6, I'm sorry, my Pritzei Zeitim. All right, so they're interested just in the derivation of that term. What do you mean by bad olives? So the word Pritz means, so literally the word Pritz, like Pei Resh Tzadik, means it bursts out of its boundaries in a bad way. So it's actually a word for, in modern Hebrew today, it's a word for somebody who is licentious. Yeah, pritzut is licentiousness. One time I'm telling the story, and it's being recorded for posterity, but my wife was on a 10K through Jerusalem. She wasn't the only one. It was a big race, 10K through Jerusalem. And because the way Jerusalem is, part of the race went through Orthodox neighborhoods. It's hard to avoid Orthodox neighborhoods. You do a race, but it was a race. So there were men and women in the race. And, and the women are wearing shorts. Men are wearing shorts. So as they go through some of the ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods, they get eggs thrown at them, and it's charming, and it's part of the hazard of the race. It's that it's like a steeplechase sort of race. You're going to get eggs thrown at you, and they shout out pritzis. So pritzis or pritzut means licentiousness. Why? Because of their dress, their immodest dress. So they didn't go directly through those neighborhoods. They kind of skirted those neighborhoods, but the folks came. Anyhow, that's the word. So somehow it applies to olives. They wonder how it applies to olives. So it means to burst forth out of boundaries, maybe improperly, but in general it becomes a word just for wickedness. Okay, and that's what Amar Rav Huna. Rish Zeitim. So he says the word Rasha means bad, wicked, evil. So evil olives. Still, it doesn't explain exactly what that means. We'll get to it. But they're trying to understand the derivation. Amar Rav Yosef umay kra. So Rav Yosef says, what is the scriptural origin of those terms? So you turn to page 171, and now they quote from the Bible. Uvnei pritzei amcha. So the Pritz people of your people. Yinasu lamid chazon. They will try to follow the word of the prophet, the visionary, v'nichshalu, and they will fail. So that's in context there. The wicked people of your people, the wicked ones of your people. It's people that try to do good but can't quite do it. And actually, you get a sense of what these olives are. They're trying to be real olives, but they're not. Right? I mean, they look like olives, but in fact, they don't taste good enough to be olives. Okay. So that's one possible derivation. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar mehacha. So Rav Nachman finds another place where you have that word. V'holid ben paritz shofech dam. So you give birth to somebody who is a paritz, and that person spills blood, sheds blood. Actually, it's a term for a murderer. So there you've got the word poretz, and you've got murderer. So they're saying that's what it means. It means a wicked person. Okay. But in this case, obviously, there's nothing wicked about the olives. They're not casting a moral judgment on the olives, but they're just saying that's what the word means. So now they know what the word means. Now they're going to try to figure out, what exactly constitutes a bad olive. V'kama pritze zeitim. Okay, so their assumption is, which is between the lines, which I'll explain to you right now, is that what were olives used for primarily in the ancient Near East? Right, oil. Really, eating them would have been a secondary purpose. People grew olives for the crop was really the olive oil, not the cash was the olive oil, not the olives themselves. Okay, we eat them now. By the way, if you've ever eaten a raw olive, they're not very good. I mean, you wouldn't even. There's a lot you have to do before you make it an edible thing. So my sense is in those days they really just used the olives to make oil. So a bad olive therefore becomes not an inedible olive, but an olive that produces very bad oil. Okay, and in fact, what they're going to say here is it produces not enough oil. Whatever reason the olive doesn't produce enough oil, that makes it a bad olive. Okay, and once it's a bad olive, don't worry about it. Not kosher at all. Now we get to what we had talked about a couple of weeks ago is the minimum amount that can make something authentic or not authentic. Okay, so now the Rabbi Elazar Amar. So Rabbi Elazar says arba kabim lekorah. Okay, so the minimum amount of oil for a crop to make it actually a decent crop, otherwise you would define the olive as being not really an olive at all, is 4 kavs inside a korah. Okay, I'll explain korah first because it's easier and there's a little picture of it. So a korah is the amount of olives you put in your average olive press. Okay, anybody ever seen one of these ancient olive presses? They have them in Israel in museums, and different places too. There's a picture of one, and that picture reminds me very much of something I've seen in Israel too. Okay, so they apparently, well, we'll find out that they didn't quite standardize them, but they mostly standardized them. So there was a certain amount that was called a korah. Korah just means column. Right, so there was a column that you would put in, and you could sort of see the technology. It's primitive technology. There are places today that still do it. There are actually villages in the West Bank that still create olive oil this way, and you can see their olive presses like that. Obviously, there's higher tech ways of doing this, but and apparently this is like the real good tasting way of doing it. Anyway,
Did they also use it for the lighting the eternal light lamps? The oil?
Sure. Yeah. Well, they would use the olive they use olive for all sorts of things. Yeah. Olive oil for all sorts of things. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now what they're saying is 4 kavs. If you get 4 kavs of oil from your average oil press, then it's a real olive, and it counts as an olive. Okay. Now the question is what's a kav? So we had seahs before. Okay. So I'm not doing math. Okay. I'm giving you the numbers here, and you can do the math yourself. 3 seahs is the equivalent to 18 kavs. Okay, we get that from Steinsaltz. 1 seah is 6 kavs. Okay, now to give you a sense of it before, because obviously we have a sense of what a foot is, what a meter is, things like that too. They didn't use those things; they used different units of measure. But we just had an example of a unit of measure. The amount of wheat that could cover the average shovel. Shovels like that big. The average shovel was 2 seahs. Okay, so 2 seahs is not very big because the shovel isn't very big, but you can cover, and that was the minimum amount of wheat where you kept on working the field. Okay, so 2 seahs worth of wheat could cover a field. Okay, now a kav is 1/6 of 1 seah, so 4 kavs of oil isn't very much at all. It's maybe a quarter cup of this teacup right here. It's not very much at all. So that's a lot of work you're putting in because you're harvesting the olives, right? You're harvesting the olives, you're putting them. The press is very heavy to get very little oil. So if you get that amount or less, it's actually not even an olive. You don't even consider it an olive at that point. It gives you such a poor amount of oil. Okay, is that clear? Okay. Now, if you want, you can do the math yourself. I'm actually just kind of giving you a basic sense of scale. Okay, at least that's one opinion. Okay. Debate Rabbi Yanai Amrai Satayim Lekorah. So Rabbi Yanai says no, 2 seahs. So 2 seahs is quite a bit more than 4 kavs. He's saying in other words, he's saying the minimum is actually much higher. If you only get 2 seahs, which I think is like 12 kavs. It's a lot more than 2 kavs. So even that amount, but it's still not very much. Okay? Well, 2 seahs is about that pile of wheat we talked about just a second ago. If you only get that amount from all your hard work, in that case, it's not really an olive. And the implication, of course, is that that's a bad crop, And so you also don't have responsibilities for that crop if you're a sharecropper. And it's actually not even food. You don't consider it worthwhile even as food. Okay? All right, but now you've got a pretty big disagreement between like this much oil and about that much oil. What's the minimum amount? Okay? And what they say is lo plige, but they're saying actually it's not a disagreement at all. It's not a disagreement. Remember, the Talmud doesn't like disagreements because it's much easier if we just have uniform laws, uniform standards. Otherwise, there's chaos. So you have two rabbis that are disagreeing, and we're saying actually they're not disagreeing, and now they explain the disagreement. Ha ba'atra dima'ale kora be'ulala, ha ba'atre dima'ale tlata korin be'ulala. And they say one is at a place where your typical olive press has a core, one core, which is a unit of measure, and another is in a typical olive press that has two cores. It's double. Okay? So one is dealing with a whole different olive press. So apparently the olive presses weren't standard. Right. There were two types of olive press, big and small. If it's small, you're going to get a less amount of oil, lesser oil. And if it's big, you're going to get more. But if you do the math, they actually say the same number. They say the same number, which will constitute the minimum amount of oil. Okay? And that's the only reason we studied this is because right now we're interested in how they're figuring out minimum amounts where responsibilities kick in. So responsibilities for oil really is it going to be kosher? Is it not going to be kosher? Is it going to create impurity or not? Okay. So now, this happens again, like I said before, at the end of a chapter. It's shifting subjects very quickly, and so now, we're talking about impurity. I have a little story for you about impurity too, and also you'll get to some issue about measurements, how you have measurements, and what the minimum measurement of things are. So some interesting topics here. Okay, Tano Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Alu be'ilan shikochora uvasuka shikochara. Okay, it's a lot I have to explain here. Two guys are climbing a tree, and it's a weak tree. Weak tree means it bends as you climb it. Or they're climbing a branch, and it bends as you climb it. Okay, that sounds like the beginning of an interesting story, but I'll make it even more interesting for you. One of them is ritually impure, and the other is not. Okay? So how do you become ritually impure? As a man, it's men. I know it's men because I've read ahead. How do you become ritually impure?
You had an emission.
You have an emission. Right, you have an emission. Now, Steinsaltz goes a little overboard if you read the translation and says he has gonorrhea. But actually, the word there doesn't necessarily mean gonorrhea. It's one possibility. But if you have an emission, it makes you impure. Okay? So the thing about being impure is that you can then impart your impurity to something else. Okay? For instance, if I touch directly this cup and I'm ritually impure, then the cup becomes ritually impure. Okay? So then you better not touch it. Kind of an adult version of cooties. And it doesn't matter at all now. It only mattered if you were going to bring a sacrifice to the temple or you're going to touch sacred stuff. We don't have sacred stuff anymore because we don't have a temple. You're not bringing sacrifices. But the rabbi still talked about it. Okay. And by the way, if you were impure, there was a way to become pure again, but you had to wait 24 hours and you'd go to a mikveh. Okay. So anyway, there's different ways that somebody who is ritually impure can impart impurity. One is just by touching something. There's sort of a complicated thing. If I touch this and this is touching the table, does the table become impure? The answer is no, it doesn't. Okay? So the impurity only goes from my hand to the cup. Okay? But if I use this cup as a tool to move the table, okay? So I'm touching the cup. And I'm using the cup to move the table, and the table moves, then the table does become impure. Okay? So I'm climbing a tree. You're climbing the same tree. You're laughing like this isn't important, but it's extremely important. There's all sorts of interesting just philosophy and epistemology here, and math and logic. Okay? So just bear with me. Bear with me.
Explains there's so many lawyers are Jews.
Yeah. Okay. So bear with me. So I'm climbing a tree. And somebody that's impure is also climbing the tree. I'm not touching that person, but we are both touching the tree. Based on what I told you just now, does that person become impure?
Only if the tree bends.
Only if the tree bends, right. If the tree bends, it means that I'm in effect moving that person. Okay. So you got it up. All right. So what took me 5 hours to understand in my own private study took you like 2 seconds. Right. That's the issue. The issue is, does the tree bend or not? If the tree bends, then it becomes like a tool, And your climbing it moves the other person, so that person also becomes impure, which means they have to purify themselves before they offer a sacrifice in the temple, which nowadays they're not going to do, but it doesn't matter. All right, turn the page. So what they want to know is, Hechi dami ilan shekachora. All right. So what exactly is a weak tree? How much bending is bending? So they want to know. You tell me the tree, if the tree bends, well, how much bending? So what's a minimum amount of bending that would constitute me becoming impure because of this syphilitic guy that's climbing the tree? Why we're climbing trees together? It doesn't say that. I don't know. But we're climbing trees together.
It could depend on the weight of the individuals too.
It could, right? All right. So Amru debe Rabbi Yane. So Rabbi Yane says, Kol she'ein be'ikaro l'chok rava. So Rabbi Yane just says it's a very basic measurement. If it's a quarter of a cob or less, it's going to bend when you. So we had a cob before. A cob isn't very much, like that, something like that. So you have a tree that's that or less. It's going to bend.
At the trunk level?
Doesn't say at the trunk level. I would say at its average. No, it's not a branch. A branch is something else.
Right.
Yeah, so this is the trunk. Yeah, no, you're right. It's the trunk.
Right.
The trunk. That's how you start to climb the tree. Okay? Now they want Hechidami Sukkah. Now, by the way, the word Sukkah means branch. Isn't it interesting that the same word for Sukkah, to shelter, is also branch? That's interesting. So anyhow, but here it means branch. So what does it mean? Sukkah shekochara. What does it mean? A branch that's too thin. And now they actually use a very common sense way of defining that. Amar Reish Lakish, kol shenichbeit bechezionah. Anything that will disappear from eyesight if you grip it with your palm. Okay? So you grip it with your palm and you're able to make sure that none of it, I don't mean top or bottom, I mean on the inside, you can't see it all. So if it fits in the palm of your hand, an average male's hand, then it's too weak to hold your weight entirely. It's going to bend, and therefore it will make you impure. You will become subject to impurity. Okay? Any questions?
Does it matter whether or not the pure person is aware?
Oh, it doesn't matter at all. Aware, not aware. No.
But how would he know?
You're climbing the tree. Well, if he doesn't know, then there's nothing.
That's what I mean.
Right, nothing you can do about it. But you could be climbing a tree, minding your own business. And then this other guy climbs a tree, and the other guy informs you, hey, did you know I had an emission last night? So I'm impure. Oh my gosh. So we better measure the tree quickly to see, just to make sure.
If he doesn't disclose it, is he guilty of a misdemeanor?
Yeah, you got to, you should disclose it. Yeah, okay. All right. Now you can see this impurity and what makes something impure. It took up a lot of the attention of the rabbis. Not in this particular chapter. We're almost done with this. But there are tractates that are devoted just to this material. What makes you pure? What makes you impure? How do you become pure again once you become impure? Okay. Right now we're just interested in measurements. So that's the whole issue, is measurements. And some of the measurements have to do with what's the minimum amount of stuff that can make you impure. Okay. Now there's something here that was very real, and it's still real to some people today. You'll see. Tanan. Hamalech beveit hapras al gabe avanim sheyachol lahazit. Okay. So a beit hapras. I think what I'm going to do now is look at, and I do this occasionally, look at the Steinsaltz explanation for what a beit hapras is. It's a kind of cemetery. So a field containing a grave that has been plowed over. Okay? So it's a cemetery, but it's not a cemetery anymore. It's been and it's also not used as a cemetery anymore. It's been plowed over. Maybe you found out later. This happens in Israel all the time, right? Or any ancient place. I keep on saying Israel because it's the only country I ever pay attention to. But there are other countries besides Israel where there's ancient populations where this is going to come up, where there's some housing development and you find graves, right? And the graves are ancient. So suddenly it's a whole area and you don't know whether they're graves or not. Now, why is that important? It's important because we have laws about taking care of the dead, but also a dead body is a source of impurity.
That's right.
And so nowadays, the only person that cares about that kind of stuff is a Kohen, right? A Kohen is not allowed to subject himself to impurity. In biblical times, everybody had to worry about that.
Yeah.
But death, a dead body, was a principal source of impurity. So a beit hapras. So if it's a cemetery, it's really simple.
Right.
You stay away if you're a Kohen.
But if you don't know, it's been plowed over.
Yeah, and then you don't know, and you also don't know where they are exactly, because once it's been plowed over, subject to development, the bones or the remnants of a dead body could be anywhere. Okay, and therefore you could be now. So I'm just trying to think of. Let me read a little bit more. I'm going to read a little bit more in the English where it says translation and commentary, the big thick lines. So in the Mishnah, O Alot, a bet apras, a field containing a grave that has been plowed over, the ritual purity of anyone passing through such a field is in doubt, because the bones buried there may have been smashed and strewn anywhere in the field. And the halakha is that a person touching, carrying, or moving a bone the size of a grain of barley contracts ritual impurity. So just even a little bit can make you impure. The rabbis therefore decreed that the soil of the bet apras is ritually impure, and that imparts ritual impurity to anyone carrying or touching it. Okay, so that would be it. So you wouldn't go through that field, except what if you need to? Okay, well, they build a bridge. So you build a bridge. You might have stone. So some of the bridge could be stones. You put stones on there. Okay, now you know from our tree story that what would be very important for those stones? They can't move, because if they're moving, then they become a tool by which you're moving impure stuff. And then you become impure. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with right now. Okay, hamalech bevet hapras. Okay, so you're walking through one of these places, al gabe avanim, but you're doing it on the stones. She'echol hasit, but the stones can move. Okay,
They're not firm.
they're maybe not firm enough. Okay, al hadam ve'ala be'ema shekochan ra tameh. So if they're stones that can move, if you're riding on a person, or you're riding on an animal, and those people have a weakness, then you could become impure. Okay, so two things are happening. Oh no, I think it's two things right here. Yeah, no. So there's two things that can make you impure. One is the stones are weak. Okay, but let's say the stones are fine, or you're riding on top of a person or an animal. Now keep that in mind. We'll do it as an animal. So an animal, you don't care whether it becomes pure or impure, and you're riding on top of the animal. So once you're riding on top of the animal, it's like me putting my hand on this cup, and the cup touches the table incidentally. The table doesn't become impure, so the animal doesn't make you impure, because the animal is walking on the impure stuff, but not you. Okay. Now but
The animal kicks over the stone.
okay, so we'll get to that in a second. Yeah, the thing is that the animal, what they're going to say is the animal only moves the stones if the animal is too weak to carry you. Otherwise, the basic movement of the animal doesn't create the impurity that will make you impure. Okay? So what they say is that if the rock moves and you're walking on it, then you become impure. If you're on an animal, you're okay, unless the animal is too weak to hold your entire weight, which means the animal is going to be shifting around a lot and then moving the impure stuff too much, and then you'll become impure. Or there could be a human being. Now, what do they mean by human being? So human beings sometimes were hired in ancient times to carry people. So you might have a human being that doesn't care about being impure. For instance, a non-Jew who looks at these laws and says, "This is all a bunch of nonsense. What do I care about this stuff?" Right? So you hire that non-Jew then to carry you across the cemetery. But if the non-Jew or the person, the human being, is too weak to carry your weight and is stumbling around in the field, then they can make you subject to impurity. Okay. So of course you've caught the weakness in the argument is that just the normal moving of the animal or the person should be enough to move that impure stuff. So we're going to get to that. But right now, are there any questions? Okay, so let me go on a little bit, and then we'll come back to the whole thing about the animal. Okay, so page 170. Heichi dami adam shekochora. So this always becomes their question. So what does it mean to have a person or an animal, really, too? Do they get the animal later? Well, we'll start with the person. What does it mean that the person is too weak to carry your weight? How do you gauge that? Now, it could be the person says, "Gewalt, you're just much too heavy for me." But it's not that. It's not subjective. It's got to be really an objective measurement of how a person is weak. And they say, "Amaresh Lakish, kol sherochvo v'arkavo tav nokshod." His knees are kind of knocking against you. They knock against each other. It shows that he's carrying the weight and not walking in a straight line, stumbling. So if the animal or the human being is stumbling, then they're moving the dirt in too much of a way, and then you're actually using the animal as a tool. Okay. So they started with a man carrying it, the knees knocked together, And then what about an animal? Amrei devei Rabbiane kol sherachva mati laglalim. So yeah, for an animal, if you're so heavy, you're causing it to go to the bathroom, right? Glalim are droppings. You're causing it to make droppings. Then it's too much weight, and then you're becoming a source of it. The animal's becoming a source of impurity for you. Okay. So on that happy note, we're going to end.